The primary thing that always stands out in the customer journey is that you don't have one customer that's a monolith in almost any business. When I apply that to Brooks Brothers, we have kids that are graduating from college, people that are interviewing for their first job, weddings, and the customer that comes in for one is not going to be the same as the customer that comes in for another.
Welcome to another episode of the E-commerce Toolbox Experts Perspective. Joining us today, we have Brian Schmidt, all the way over from New York. He is the VP of Integrated Marketing Ecom for Brooks Brothers and Eddie Bauer. So welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So obviously did a bit of research before the show. You've been at a lot of really cool places, from Walgreens to Groupon and different businesses. Why don't you give us a bit of a history of your career and how you ended up in a VP role for Catalyst Brands now, which is kind of a portfolio of companies?
Yeah, so my degree was in music, which I, of course, went immediately on to use when I went to work for Walgreens. I've always wanted to work in the marketing and business side, and I came up as a creative sort of in that music space. So my career really followed different paths of marketing and CRM. I really camp in that side of the house. Cut my teeth in email. I worked for Groupon for several years. And when I was at Groupon, I was grateful to be able to move into an expanded role that looked after North American customer acquisition and retention. Went to a startup, went to another startup, went to another startup. So I bounced around from a bunch of different kinds of businesses and now find myself as part of Catalyst Brands working in the retail apparel space, which is a new one for me. As you mentioned, I've been in a lot of different kinds of industries, and I feel like I've never been in the same industry twice. And this is an exciting time for me to be in a new space, especially with a company that's constantly evolving with the Spark Brands recent merger with JCPenney.
Yeah. So, in the portfolio is a lot of really, really cool and historical brands. It sounds like you're focused mainly on Brooks Brothers, Eddie Bauer. Maybe talk to us a bit about, obviously you're looking to modernize commerce in your role. How does that play out when you're working with companies that are literally hundreds of years old from their founding?
Yeah, it's interesting. My background actually is kind of hidden in there that I've done this a bit. I was at Hammacher Schlemmer, which was the oldest catalog company in the US. I was part of Walgreens. I was at Fender, the guitar company, and that's when, guitars are very much an offline thing. Musical instruments are very much offline. Alcohol delivery, modernizing that, which is a crazy industry. Broadway ticketing, which has been a thing that's historically gone offline. So I've always been in sort of this industry digital transformation space. I join retail and apparel a little bit further along in their journey, but I think it's an interesting thing for brands like Brooks Brothers and Eddie Bauer that have more than a century of history to them. A lot of them started e-commerce in the early days of e-commerce, but the question is, do they have a modern stack now? And that's often the evolution problem that they run into. It's not that they haven't been selling things online for a long time. It's that they may be on a 10-year-old SAP system, or they may have some super old technology powering email or the website or whatever it may be, and then battling to get the funding to update that stack to be a more modern stack is always the thing. So I think that when I look at Brooks and Eddie Bauer, they came into the Spark portfolio from different places. I've got two brands that are on different e-commerce platforms. They've got similar-ish MarTech stacks. We talk about the JCPenney merger and how we're trying to find synergies across all the brands. So definitely always looking at the technology stack and seeing how we can evolve it to just help us really find those modern customer experiences and really modernize the stack to be the best digital business we can be.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned, obviously you're working with brands that are over 100 years old. I was reading before the show a bit about the 125th anniversary of the Oxford cloth button-down. Maybe talk to us a bit about, what is that product, the history behind it, and from what I hear, you guys ran a pretty successful campaign on the back of that, so maybe talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah, Brooks Brothers is a fascinating company, 207 years old, founded right here in New York City in 1818. Ton of history because of that. We're the oldest clothier in the US. So we're the longest running apparel brand in the US. And we were one of the first, if not the first brand in the US to offer off-the-rack sizing. After that, you've got sort of every innovation that happened in clothing over the next 200 years. There's a ton of stuff. And it just happens that right at the turn of the 20th century, I suppose, in the 1900s, right at that time frame, we had a series of innovations. And one of them was the Oxford button-down collar. And that was a really interesting one because it really changed a lot about shirting. And that collar led to a number of things that would come afterwards in terms of how people thought about dress shirts overall. The way the story goes is that the Brooks brothers were, of which there were several, were at a polo match watching players play. And at that time, collars were not attached to shirts. They were stuffed inside of the collar of the shirt, and they would fly away during the polo match because the wind would catch them as they were riding around on horses. And then the legend goes that they thought that surely there's a better way. And what they thought to do was to button them down. And so that's really the first time that collars were attached to shirts even. And it's the invention of the modern sport shirt in some ways. The full thing is that it's the Oxford button-down collar polo, which is just where the invention started. But obviously that's now become a big part of button-downs and dress shirts across the boards for many, many years now. And I think there's even one in the MoMA collection around the history of apparel and fashion. So big moment in our history of many. We also invented non-irons, among other things. But that was a big moment. And so, coming up on the 120th anniversary of it feels like a great moment for a brand campaign, right? And Brooks Brothers hadn't really had a major brand campaign since they turned 200 back in 2018, which was a huge moment for the brand, and spent a lot of money and did a lot of amazing activations that really helped the brand grow through 2018. 2019 had some troubles, and then COVID hit. And that's when the brand filed for bankruptcy and was ultimately acquired by Spark. So there's been some evolution in the brand since that time. And it felt like a good moment for us to get the brand back out there and get it just back in front of customers. And I think we found a really great way to do that with a great story, like a classic heritage story, a very simple product for us to get behind. And we were able to just create an amazing campaign featuring, a couple of celebrities, some really striking portraiture, and some interviews with them that led to a lot of success in out-of-home, CTV, and other channels for us. And it was really been a phenomenal campaign. We're still seeing impact from it months after it initially ran.
Yeah, very cool. And I saw a lot of buzz on it. I saw a huge billboard when I landed in Times Square not a couple months ago, or whenever the campaign ran. You just spoke a bit at eTail Boston. You did a keynote on the customer journey from discovery to loyalty, and obviously you oversee multiple brands. You're with a couple of other folks. Maybe, looking back on that conversation now, like what stood out to you the most? Yeah, I'd love to hear a bit more about kind of your takeaways on the back of that conversation.
Yeah, it was a super interesting conversation. It was an interesting collection of brands. We were kind of all of us in slightly different spaces, although there was a CMO also on that panel that was in exactly the same space as me. I think in the conversations, there was a lot of different points of view on customer, and obviously the customer journey being the topic of that panel. But for me, the primary thing that always stands out in the customer journey is that you don't have one customer that's a monolith in almost any business. It's very, very rare that you're like, this is my singular customer journey. This is the only kind of customer I have. And when I apply that to Brooks Brothers, for example, we have kids that are graduating from college and getting a suit for that. We have people that are interviewing for their first job or finding themselves in a job that actually requires to be dressed up in a different way. We have weddings. We've got all these different life moments that happen. And the customer that comes in for one is not going to be the same as the customer that comes in for another. If it's a kid fresh out of college who's graduating or a CEO, they have slightly different missions in what they're trying to purchase, and then what their purchase behavior will be afterwards. And so when you go to map it out, you've just got to make sure that you're not thinking about one customer, but you do a little bit of due diligence to say, hey, these are my 4 or 5 customer personas that matter. Maybe it's 2, 3, maybe it's 4 or 5. Don't go to like 20 because then you're getting too many. It's going to be hard to break it apart. But just thinking about that, there are going to be a couple of distinct customer journeys, and you've got to think about different customer pools differently in order to get the maximum impact from your work.
Yeah. And one thing that surprised me a little bit on the campaign side, but I'm very curious to hear your opinion. Obviously, when you have a very historic brand, you have a lot of brand equity, and you guys do some pretty interesting / really cool collaborative campaigns that maybe have a bit of creative risk in them. Like, how are you guys balancing that to make sure that you don't deviate too far? Actually, what's interesting is this is not to date the podcast, but this is the week of the Cracker Barrel back and forth logo, right? Not that we want to get into that, but obviously people want to evolve, but sometimes it creates potentially unforeseen challenges. So maybe talk to us a bit about how you're balancing taking on creative risk without kind of potentially upsetting the base.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the Brooks side of the house, Brooks Brothers does have tremendous heritage. We've got a very loyal customer base. And over time, we've seen at the moments we've strayed too far from who we are or major changes to the product line, we hear about it from our customers. They are not shy about giving us feedback. They haven't been for over 200 years. Actually, one of my favorite, just to go back to the history slightly, one of my favorite moments of history for Brooks Brothers is that we actually have in our archives a complaint letter from Mary Todd Lincoln because her order was late. So we've been getting complaints up and down the board for a long time. When there's issues, our customers are not afraid to tell us. So, if we're changing product shape and size, if we're going too much in a certain direction, they're going to tell us about it. So we're always careful not to stray too far from our core and to make sure that we're maintaining the core offering. But then we're willing to play in spaces where we can leverage it to put the brand in more modern contexts, I would say is probably the most accurate way to think about it. And so a 207, it's not that we're trying to find a way to be cool. That's hard to be at a heritage brand, but trying to find a way to break through to younger demographics, to find a way to leverage a history to tell new stories. There's always a ton of stuff that we're working on in that space and trying to get it right. And it also does not say that we always get it right either. I think the partnerships that we have done in the last couple of years and some of the ones we have come up, there's some of them that are really great. I'm really excited about a couple of them that are coming. And there's some of them that we've done where it's like, I understand what we were going for. We didn't quite nail it, didn't quite hit the mark. Or, we do something and, you do a partnership with somebody and you make 100 pieces of it. If it isn't a PR splash, no one even knows that you did it. Like there's probably customers that don't know about certain collabs we've even done because they weren't done to scale or didn't have media pickup or they didn't have the right support from them from a marketing perspective. So got to make sure that you're also doing the right things to make the collabs worth it. But I think there's a lot that we're still thinking about it. How do we tell our modern fit story? How do we talk about our expanded product lines? How do we take Preppy, which is back, and bring it into the context of streetwear, if that makes sense, or into these other situations? So we're always thinking about different kinds of collabs and partnerships. And we've got a long history of great ones, and we've got a bunch of good ones coming too.
Yeah, and you actually just touched on a point where I wanted to take the conversation next. Like, how are you guys staying relevant to the cultural changes across multiple brands? I recently just did an episode and the exec I was chatting with is in the outdoor wear space. And she was talking a bit about how wearing outdoor clothes to the office or kind of like as like a sweet streetwear is somewhat of like a Gen Z trend. So maybe talk to us a bit about like the trends. Do you guys hop on them early, hop on them late, somewhere in the middle? Like, how are you thinking about them?
I think we were probably later to trends than other brands are. I think some of that is just the stalwart nature of the heritage of the brand. We're not pivoting incredibly quickly with trends. We're going to see where things are going. So generally speaking, you're not going to find us on the bleeding edge of a trend. Now, that said, one of the trends that we have seen is that fashion is incredibly cyclical and the cycles seem to be getting tighter. And so I think as I'm going to make an assumption about your age, millennials, we may be looking at things like, oh yeah, that was the 90s for us, right? Or the early thousands. That's back in fashion now for Gen Z. And we're seeing it in a lot of different spaces. And so you will have seen in the last year, especially in high fashion, which then filters down and through, Preppy is back. So Hermes is doing Preppy lines and other folks are doing Preppy lines. That's great because we are the original prep band. And so that gives us some lift in some spaces. And like, for example, rugbies are up like 26% this year for us. Just like the classic rugby shirt. We've been selling that for a long, long time. And so when those cycles come back through, we have been fortunate to take advantage of them in some of the stuff we have historically offered. Now, that said, how can we find the moments to be culturally relevant? We've done a lot in film and TV. We do dress celebrities. We're on red carpets. We spend a lot of time in that space. And that's always going to be an important piece of being part of the culture is being on the people that are part of the culture, right? So there's a lot of moments that we look for there. And again, we're always trying to figure out what the ways are where we can put ourselves in the modern context, but not reinvent ourselves because we do have a lot of history. There's a lot of heritage here. We have incredible value and an incredibly quality brand. And we don't need to run away from that just to chase, a flash in the pan or, a certain 15-minute moment. It's how do we find those right contexts to be interesting to new generations or take advantage of moments as they pop up that include us, like quiet luxury or something else.
Are you guys using any of your brick and mortar locations? I mentioned I was in New York not too long ago, and I think I stopped by actually by coincidence your Lower Manhattan store, which is one of the flagships. How are you guys thinking about leveraging like that type of historic space that you have to like tell that story? How does that feed back into like the omnichannel strategy that you guys are running?
Stores are huge for both of my brands, Brooks Brothers and Eddie Bauer. They play a slightly different role for both brands. Obviously, Eddie Bauer, outerwear brand, going through a little bit of a brand reinvention for itself right now, where it's trying to move from being really top of the mountain outdoors to being, in our most recent campaign, for the outdoors and the outdoorsy. So a little bit of every man in the outdoors. Brooks Brothers, obviously, suiting is the core. Suiting and dress shirts. And a lot of people will know Brooks Brothers primarily for suiting, even though we're kind of more of a men's department store in terms of total offering. But the suits are hard to buy online. They're incredibly hard to buy online. And most guys don't buy suits that often. And so I would say most people don't know what their suit size is going to be when they go to buy a suit online. So having those physical locations is essential to having a really crisp and clean customer experience across our core categories. The Brooks Brothers brand is majority stores in terms of total revenue. Web's doing a decent amount, and web and stores are a little bit more even on the Eddie Bauer side. But in both those cases, the stores are an essential element, and they're really essential to that customer experience. So you're talking about our new flagship in New York, which we consider to be our global flagship at 195 Broadway. It's in the amazing historic AT&T building. But it's actually not far from where the original Brooks Brothers store was, which was near the base of the Brooklyn Bridge, 50 years before the Brooklyn Bridge was built. And there's some really interesting things in that space. It's a really gorgeous space. So we do plan to use it for a lot of different events, whether those are private functions or having celebrities or different folks come through. We had a partnership with Jalen Brunson last year, and he did some visits to stores, and we had best customer events there. So we do try and use those spaces in a variety of different ways. But at the end of the day, it's really where our customer experience it lives. And we try to make our digital experience as good as it can be. But for a brand that sells what we sell on the Brooks Brothers side, sometimes that high touch in person is really critical. And so that's where our stores just come in clutch for us all the time, is to just build that relationship with the customer.
I heard you mention earlier synergies, right? So obviously you're managing multiple brands. There's multiple brands as part of the kind of portfolio. How are you thinking about creating synergies amongst the brands? Is it like, sure, in a pitch deck somewhere, there's something about sharing data across brands and stuff like that. Maybe how does this actually work out pragmatically?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that when you've got a bunch of apparel brands, especially you're going to find these like moments where like you've got a lot of people that are doing similar things, or you've got similar needs, especially on the technology side. So for the audience, Spark Brands, as it merged with JCPenney, we now are Catalyst Brands. Catalyst Brands is made up of JCPenney, Brooks Brothers, Eddie Bauer, Aeropostale, Nautica, and Lucky Brand. So it's 6 relatively different brands. Obviously, we have one major department store and then 5 what we would call specialty brands, ranging from Brooks Brothers to Aeropostale. So you've got an average age in the Gen X range and an average age in the Gen Z or Gen Alpha range. So you've got a pretty wide spread of those customers, right? So when in that PE deck and they're going, you should share data, like maybe you have the same customers. It's like, maybe not the same customers between Aero and Brooks. And we've looked at that stuff, and I think we've tried to leverage what we can there. But at the end of the day, we recognize the customers are different. And so we're not trying to force a synergy in that space. We're not trying to push the Aero customer to be the Brooks Brothers customer, the Lucky customer to be the Brooks Brothers customer. We're not even trying, in my 2 brands that I'm operating, I'm not even trying to push Eddie Bauer customers to be Brooks Brothers customers. Now, there's some overlap, obviously, but not going hard at that particular angle. But then when you look at the broader set of things, you're going to find synergies across so many different locations. Multiple of the Catalyst brands sell jeans. So if we're buying denim, are there synergies across how we buy denim, who we work with in partnerships there? There's going to be those kinds of things. On the marketing side, technology is a huge thing. Are we all on the same email provider contract? Are we all on the same agency? Are we getting the scale of fees that we can be getting, or the scale of contract that we can be getting with any one partner? So definitely looking at a lot of the technology right now to say like, hey, is this doing what we needed to do? And also, can it do what we needed to do? When we look at the e-commerce vendors, JCPenney is a multi-billion-dollar e-commerce business. Nautica is not. Does Nautica need the same technology as JCPenney? Probably not in a number of cases. And so like, where does it make sense? Where doesn't it make sense? That's a big part of what we're working through right now, is trying to make the best decisions for driving the business, and also make the decisions, that allow us to find cost efficiencies where we can redeploy those dollars into marketing, redeploy those dollars into other projects like growing our store footprint or whatnot. So there's a lot of really great things that the team's been working through, and we made a tremendous amount of progress, and there's a long way still to go.
On that thread, what was one of the biggest surprising synergies that you found? And what was the biggest misconception that you discovered around synergies?
That's an interesting question. I would say there's still a lot of things that we haven't actualized yet that are good ideas in concept. And so there's a lot of stuff that we're going to find out whether or not this was real or not when it comes down to it. And there was one concept about changing e-commerce platforms, because all the brands were not on the same e-commerce platform, where we're like, hey, if we just move to this one platform, it'll be way cheaper for us to go there. It's going to be, we're going to save a ton of money if we move all the smaller brands to this like e-commerce platform. And we looked at it and went, ooh, actually, when you look at all of the technology that goes in, that e-commerce platform is actually not a huge percentage of the budget. It's in our CDP, it's in our ESP, it's in the hosting platform, it's in the CDN, it's in all these tools that support the business. And so just migrating by itself, maybe there's some savings there after you count the massive migration costs of moving. But I think it was one where we're like, a lot of leadership team members were like, oh yeah, this is an easy way for us to save money. And then when we looked at it, we're like, ooh, actually not going to save the dollars we thought we were going to save. And so it sets up more of a long-term conversation of, is this the right decision for us long-term? Do we still want to do this, even though the synergy isn't necessarily there or is immediately there as far as savings and things go? On the other side of things, I think when we looked at some of the contracts with some of the partners, Brooks Brothers and JCPenney both have loyalty programs. We were both using the same provider. When we went to them and said, hey, we're going to combine these and we're thinking about maybe launching loyalty programs with other brands, what does our rate look like? The rate that they came back with was much, much better than either of our previous contracts. And so where certain vendors came back and you're like, wait, how are we both combined on a contract now paying less than what either of us were paying previously? How much were you charging us previously? That's been a really funny conversation as certain things have popped up as far as, hey, what's the buying power of JCPenney combined with the other brands? Or just getting a moment to relook at things and be like, hey, actually, we didn't get as good of a deal as we thought the first time around. That's been sort of the funnier savings that we found for sure.
That's awesome. And Brian, thank you so much for your time. This was a phenomenal episode and really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Happy to be here.
The e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives is brought to you by Noivo. To find out more about Noivo and how we can help you debug your e-commerce site and rocket your revenue, visit www.noivo.com. That's noibu.com. And then make sure to search for the e-commerce toolbox Expert Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Noivo, thanks for listening.